called Identity Access Management 101. So Identity Access Management is the best place to start with AWS because it's all about setting up your users and granting those users access to the AWS console. IAM, what is it? Well, essentially, it allows you to manage users and their level of access to the AWS console. It's important to understand IAM and how it works, both for the exam and for administrating a company's AWS account in real life. So this is one of the core concepts that you're going to need to understand going into the exam. So what does IAM actually give you? Well, it gives you centralized control of your AWS account. It gives you shared access to your AWS account. It gives you granular permissions. It gives you identity federation. And what do I mean by that? Well, it just means that you can connect your IAM up to Active Directory or into Facebook or LinkedIn, for example. So you can actually federate with different identity providers. And we'll cover off how to do that in a later lecture. It also allows you to do multi-factor authentication. So you can use two-factor authentication when logging in. And we're actually going to set that up in the next lab. And IAM also allows you to provide temporary access for users or devices and services where necessary. So you can actually set it up so that if you're developing like a web application or a mobile phone application, that application can temporarily access your AWS account and perhaps store things in like DynamoDB or in S3, for example. It allows you to set up and manage your own password rotation policy. It integrates with many different AWS services, and it supports PCI DSS compliance. Okay, so before we start our lab, I just want to introduce to you some critical terms. So the first one's a user, and it's pretty obvious what a user is. Think end users or people. We then have groups, and groups are simply a collection of users under one set of permissions. So you might have a group that's your finance group, or you might have your systems administrator group, or you might have your HR group. Essentially, it's a way of grouping your users together and applying one or more sets of permissions to that group. We then have roles. Now, a role is really, really important, and the best way to understand what a role is to go on and use it, and we're going to do this a lot in the coming labs. So you create roles, and you can then assign them to AWS resources. So you might have an EC2 instance, which is a virtual machine, and you might give it the role in order to access S3, and then that EC2 instance can write files directly to S3, and you don't need to set up usernames and passwords for that EC2 instance. And that's exactly what we're going to do in the next couple of labs. And you then have policies. Now, policies is simply a document that defines one or more permissions. So policy is basically permissions, and you apply policies or you attach policies to users, groups, and roles, right? They connect up to each other. So you can attach a policy to a user, to a group, or to a role, and users, groups, and roles can all share the same policy document. So a policy document basically sits on top of each of those three pillars. Okay, that's really it, guys. The best way to learn IAM is to start using it. So let's start our first lab. If you've got the time, feel free to move on to the next lecture. Thank you.